Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico has once again positioned himself as one of the most outspoken leaders within the European Union, but this time his stance has caused shockwaves far beyond Brussels. Following the high-profile Alaska summit, where global powers including the United States and Russia were in the spotlight, Fico openly criticized the European Union and expressed support for Russia in a way that signals a widening rift inside Europe's fragile unity. His remarks were not only a critique of EU policies, but also a declaration that Slovakia will not follow what he perceives as a one-sided Western narrative. Fico's choice of words and the timing of his statements have made this episode particularly significant as Europe grapples with war on its borders, transatlantic tensions, and an ongoing debate about sovereignty versus bloc solidarity. Fico's criticism of the EU was sharp and unrelenting. He accused the Union of blindly following American interests, arguing that European leaders had sacrificed their nation's independence by adopting Washington's line on Russia and global conflicts. In his view, the EU has become a tool rather than a sovereign collective of states, and this undermines not only Slovakia but all of Europe. According to Fico, the Alaska summit further highlighted the degree to which European countries are sidelined in major geopolitical decisions. He suggested that while the United States and Russia discussed pressing global matters, the EU was little more than an observer, with no real leverage in shaping the outcome. For him, this was proof that Europe's strategy is failing and that new approaches are necessary if the continent is to secure peace and prosperity. Fico's backing of Russia was equally striking. He framed Moscow not as the aggressor often depicted in Western narratives, but as a necessary partner in stabilizing Europe. He insisted that dialogue, cooperation, and pragmatic engagement with Russia are far more beneficial than sanctions, isolation, and hostility. In his analysis, sanctions have harmed European economies more than Russia, a point he has raised repeatedly in domestic debates. The Alaska summit, he claimed, revealed once again that the United States seeks confrontation while Russia seeks recognition as an equal power. By siding with Moscow, Fico was sending a clear message that Slovakia will not simply fall in line with the prevailing consensus in Brussels. Instead, he intends to steer his country toward a more balanced foreign policy, one that acknowledges Russia's influence and necessity in the region. The reaction to his comments has been predictably polarized. Within Slovakia, Fico has a strong base of support among voters who are skeptical of EU policies and who view the bloc as overreaching into national sovereignty. Many Slovaks share his concerns about the economic costs of sanctions, energy crises, and the perception that their small nation is being dragged into conflicts that do not serve its direct interests. For these citizens, Fico's boldness is a refreshing reminder that national leaders should prioritize their own people before obeying directives from Brussels. On the other hand, critics argue that his stance is reckless, undermines European unity, and gives unnecessary legitimacy to Moscow at a time when much of Europe is rallying to contain Russia's geopolitical ambitions. Internationally, Fico's remarks are likely to deepen divides within the EU itself. Countries such as Poland and the Baltic states, which view Russia as an existential threat, are unlikely to tolerate open support for Moscow from a fellow EU member. They may push for stronger pressure on Slovakia to align with common European positions. Meanwhile, larger states like Germany and France will have to weigh how to respond to this challenge without further alienating Bratislava. In this way, Fico's comments could reignite debates about the very structure of the European Union and whether it should allow such divergent voices within its ranks. From a geopolitical perspective, Fico's alignment with Russia after the Alaska summit also underscores a growing theme: the fragmentation of the Western alliance. While NATO and the EU attempt to project unity, voices like Fico's reveal that cracks are widening beneath the surface. For Russia, this is a victory in itself. Moscow thrives when Western unity falters, and Fico's rhetoric plays directly into its narrative that Europe is divided and increasingly skeptical of Washington's leadership. If other leaders begin echoing similar sentiments, even cautiously, it could mark a turning point in Europe's internal politics. The Alaska summit itself looms large in this narrative. The meeting symbolized a rare moment of direct engagement between Washington and Moscow. But for Fico, it highlighted Europe's irrelevance. He argued that Europeans should not simply sit back and watch as global powers decide their fate. Instead, he called for a more assertive, independent European voice, one that is not dictated by U.S. strategies or NATO imperatives. To him, siding with Russia is not about betraying Europe, but about giving it the strategic depth and flexibility it currently lacks. Fico's words also tap into broader dissatisfaction across Europe. Citizens from Italy to Hungary to parts of Germany have expressed frustration with the costs of sanctions, rising energy bills, and the perception that EU elites prioritize ideological battles over practical governance. By publicly backing Russia, Fico may be attempting to position himself as the figurehead of this rising discontent. His populist brand of politics thrives on challenging established institutions and narratives, and the EU's approach to Russia has become a prime target. Whether others follow his lead remains to be seen, but the fact that such rhetoric now comes from the head of a European government rather than fringe parties is a significant development. Economically, his arguments carry weight. Slovakia, like many Central European countries, has long relied on Russian energy supplies. While diversification efforts are underway, the costs and instability created by the sudden pivot away from Moscow have been deeply felt by Slovak businesses and households. Fico seized on this reality, presenting himself as the defender of ordinary Slovaks against what he sees as irrational EU policies that hurt the very people they claim to protect. He framed his support for Russia not as an ideological position, but as a practical necessity for ensuring energy security and economic stability. At the same time, Fico's words raise uncomfortable questions for Europe about loyalty, security, and the meaning of solidarity. If an EU member openly supports Russia while the bloc seeks to isolate it, what does that say about the EU's cohesion? Can the Union tolerate such dissent without weakening its collective credibility? These are the dilemmas now confronting European policymakers. For Washington, too, Fico's comments are a warning that U.S. influence over Europe is not absolute, and that dissenting leaders may complicate efforts to maintain a unified Western front. Ultimately, Fico's slam against the EU and backing of Russia after the Alaska summit is not merely a domestic political move. It reflects deeper currents of frustration, division, and realignment in Europe. His statements have amplified existing tensions between East and West within the EU, between pragmatism and ideology, and between sovereignty and solidarity. The fact that he chose to make these comments in the immediate aftermath of a major US-Russia summit only magnifies their impact, placing Slovakia at the center of a much larger debate about the future of Europe and its role in the world.